I'm joined today by my colleagues, Councilmember Blumenfield and Councilmember Rodriguez. Mr. Verano, can you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Councilmember Rahman.
Here.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Here.
Councilmember Buscaino. Councilmember Buscaino is absent. Councilmember Blumenfield.
Blumenfield present.
3 members and a quorum, Madam Chair.
Nithya, it says that we're in practice session.
Oh, yeah. Did we not start the meeting? Thanks for seeing that. I didn't even look.
That would be done on the council office's end. If Heidi's logged in, I think there's a blue button on the top right of the screen that she might need to press.
I'm going to push it right now.
Oh,
We're live.
There you go.
okay, great. Well, I guess we're gonna start again since it looks like we were not streaming the meeting. And so once again, welcome to the Homelessness and Poverty Committee meeting. Today is Thursday, October 27th, 2022, and I'm joined by my colleagues on this committee, Councilmember Blumenfield and Councilmember Rodriguez. Mr. Verano, could you please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Rahman.
Here.
Councilmember Buscaino. Councilmember Buscaino is absent. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Here.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Present.
3 members and a quorum, Madam Chair.
Okay, so today we have a few items to consider on the agenda, some which were continued from our last meeting, which was canceled, and a couple of extra items. I'm going to run through the agenda and what's on it briefly, and then we'll open up the floor for public comment. Item 1 is a Municipal Facilities Committee report about a lease amendment with Metro and a subsequent sublease with PATH for the Bridge Home location at 100 Sunset Avenue in CD11. Item 2 is also a Municipal Facilities Committee report, and that's about a lease amendment for an extension of a lease with the LA Mission. And another sublease extension with PATH to operate an interim housing site at 1920 West 3rd Street, that's in CD1. Item 3 is another Municipal Facilities Committee report, and that's about a lease agreement with the John Wesley Center for Health. And that's for the operation of a tiny home site at 499 San Fernando Road, that's also in CD1. Item 4 is a CAO report about the expansion of USC's street medicine services in the city, and I believe we'll be having a presentation from the CAO about this. Item 5 is a CAO and LAHD report related to a supportive housing project at West Cagle Canyon Street in CD7 and issuing tax-exempt conduit revenue notes for that. Item 6 is a CAO report, similarly about revenue bonds for a PSH project at 110 South Boyle Avenue in CD14. Item 7 is a CAO report about all interim housing solutions open within the city as of July 1st, and all interim housing and PSH open within the city, including city funded and non-city funded beds and units. And so there'll be a report on that as well. Item 8 is a CLA report about an ordinance to establish a commission on lived experience with homelessness under the Civil Human Rights and Equity Department, and identifying budgeting and staffing resources for the establishment of that commission. Item 9 is a motion requesting LAHSA to release monthly reports for a year following any place-based intervention in the city involving more than 10 people, and improving the city's policies about these kinds of interventions based on the experience of individual sites. Item 10 is a motion about 2020 and 2022 pit counts, any place and basically asking for more information about intervention strategies from each council district over the past 5 years. Item 11 is a motion about looking for options to conduct a third-party pit count, as well as options to conduct potentially a multi-year audit of LASA's past pit counts. Item 12 is a motion about HAP funding for round 4. And item 13, which is the last item, will be a verbal update from LASA about the room key demobilization and their progress on that, and any KPIs they want to share as they're continuing to demobilize the sites. So that sounds like a lot of work. So let's get to it. And right now I want to open up for public comment. I think.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, so I'm going to take public comment on all these items. Speakers are going to have 1 minute if they're speaking on one item, 2 minutes if they're speaking on multiple items, and a minute for general public comment if they ask for it. We have Geeta O'Neill from the City Attorney's Office to provide any guidance to the public as they prepare to call in.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. To the members of the public calling in, when it's your turn to speak, please state your name and which of the agenda items you would like to speak on. You will have 1 minute to speak on one agenda item or 2 minutes to speak on 2 or more items. In addition, those who would like to address the committee with general public comment will be provided 1 additional minute for a maximum up to 3 minutes per person for all agenda items, including general public comment. We will inform you when your time is up. When speaking on the agenda items, you must be on topic. Our goal is to get through as many speakers as we can. If you're not speaking on topic, or if we cannot tell whether you are speaking on an agenda item, I will give you 1 brief warning. If you do not immediately get clearly back on topic, or if again you stray off topic, we will forfeit the rest of your time and we'll move on to the next speaker. Thank you.
All right, caller ending in 7-6.
Sorry, just 1 moment. I think Mr. Verano has to read the instructions for people who want to call in so that they have the number.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the public who would like to offer public comment on the items listed on the agenda should call 1-669-254-5252 and use meeting ID number 160-453-9676 and then press pound. Press pound again when prompted for participant ID. Once admitted into the meeting, press *9 to request to speak. Thank you.
All right, caller ending in 7690. You should be able to unmute.
Yes, you can hear me?
Yeah, please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Well, the name is not required under the Brown Act, but my name I'll be going under is Zumadog, and I want to speak on items 3, 7, 13, and general public comment. And I'd like to say,
You got 3 minutes.
Councilmember Ronald, excuse me?
You've got 3 minutes, 2 minutes for the items, and then 1
Nice,
minute.
nice to speak with Councilmember Rahman for the first time. I've never actually spoken to an actual living communist here to tank the city, which is being done. So I'll start with number 7, housing solutions, and please consider this on topic. The homeless crisis keeps on getting worse and worse. Now, I predicted in 2006. I'm widely credited for predicting this homeless crisis. I said it's going to hit you like a tsunami wave because you're doing everything wrong, only building upscale luxury condos. Okay? Look how quickly you were able to build the Playa Vista luxury complex near the airport, but did nothing for affordable housing. Okay? So now we have a homeless crisis beyond what we seem to be able to deal with. And we have open borders. Please consider this on topic when I say the council needs to have a resolution and contact Joe Biden and say you must close the southern border because it's allowing an influx of homeless people from all over the world to come through that border right to the streets of Los Angeles. And we're seeing that. And we don't have the services to deal with that. Okay, now these are the housing solutions. So I say the first solution needs to be calling Joe Biden and say, you better close the borders because we don't have any room and we don't know what the fuck we're going to do. Okay. Now, I ran for mayor to try to do something about this in 2017, and I said that the solution are tiny homes. I'm actually the first person that came to council chambers. If you check the record, I'm the first person to suggest tiny homes. So I'd like to say, although you're a bunch of fuck-ups that destroyed this city beyond any type of reasonable expectation of repair, I am for tiny homes. Okay, so I'd like to hear about the tiny homes. If you could please stop to talk about it, what the cost per tiny home will be. And finally, regarding the interim, what to do about the homelessness. I want the people to realize that council created this homeless problem. So I don't see why there would be any expectation that they'd be able to fix it. They created the problem. Okay, since 2006, we're going to do something. We're going to put Triple H on the measure. We're going to take more money from you. We're going to do this and that. And what's happened has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. So here we are again, 2022. Oh, now we're really going to fix it. Why? You weren't trying before? So just for everybody listening, I'd like them to wonder, what makes you think council has any shot of doing more than a drip in a bucket? So the problem, they have the count coming up, item number 11, third-party count of the homeless population. It's only going to keep going up. Only drips in buckets.
That's
And
great,
then-
caller. Thank you so much for your call.
What about public comment? General.
Oh, that included your general public comment. Thank you so much. Okay, next caller is the caller ending in 9702. Should be able to unmute.
Good morning. This is Zeke Sandoval with PATH, People Assisting the Homeless, on items 1, 2, 8, 9, and general public comment.
Great. You've got 2 minutes for the items and 1 minute for general public comment. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thanks. We'd first like to express our gratitude to Chair Rahman and Council Members Rodriguez, Blumenfield, and Buscaino for continuing to address the issues facing unhoused Angelinos during this chaotic time for our city. On items 1 and 2, we're thankful to see these lease renewals come before you today. Between both interim sites, PATH serves nearly 200 residents, providing a safe place to rest, eat, and work alongside our staff to find permanent housing. We're committed to continuing this work, so our residents and staff depend on stability, especially in these uncertain times, so we humbly ask for your swift approval of both items. Regarding item 8, we're thrilled to see the proposed Commission on Lived Experience with Homelessness come before you. Our neighbors who have experienced homelessness offer a unique and vital perspective on how the city can best bring everyone home to stable long-term housing. We know firsthand how crucial it is to incorporate the perspective of those closest to the issue. At PATH, like many other providers, a substantial percentage of our staff have their own lived experience of homelessness. Each staff member brings their own individual voice to the work, and that strengthens our shared mission to end homelessness for individuals, families, and communities. We're excited to support that same opportunity for the city and encourage the Commission to look for folks who have experienced homelessness within the last 5 years so that we're getting the most up-to-date information. Regarding item 9, all of us at PATH know the best way to resolve encampments is through intensive, trauma-informed outreach connected to supportive services and permanent housing. Since the start of the pandemic, we've partnered with multiple council members to conduct encampment-to-home efforts along that model, including now with Chair Rahman's team in the LA River. Our approach is guided by decades of experience and our own internal data, but we know we are one part of a larger network. We're glad to work alongside LAHSA and your offices in examining outcomes of place-based interventions because we truly believe that services in housing, non-enforcement, resolve encampments, and end homelessness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. Next caller is the caller ending in 1025. Should be able to unmute. *6. And please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Hi, my name is Ann English. I am Director of the Speak Up program at the Corporation for Supportive Housing.
What items would you like to speak on, ma'am?
Item number 8 and general public comment.
Okay, great. You've got 2 minutes. Please go ahead. Thanks.
Okay. As someone who has worked in LA County in the housing and homeless crisis response sector for over 20 years, I'm convinced that the need for true partnership between legislators and constituents most impacted by specific policies is critical to gain a foothold on the challenges and solutions. And we're at a really pivotal moment in our city, And we have to meet this moment by leaning into the lessons that we've learned about how much we still do not understand. And barriers to making progress include an entrenched perspective within our services systems that really views beneficiaries as passive recipients, without agency or insight into their situations, and views providers and public agencies and government as sort of the expert, quote unquote, helpers. And this dynamic, really seated in capitalistic oppression, it's really endemic to our Western culture. And we've come to a place in our journey where we know this dynamic as part of our system must change. The Commission has an opportunity to thoughtfully and meaningfully collaborate with individuals who represent and advocate for their peers. It's my experience as a provider and as a leader of the Speak Up program at CSH for the past 10 years that there is no substitute for proximity to the people who are served or harmed by policy and governance. And if we respect the magnitude of the homelessness crisis, we are beholden to ourselves and the community to actively engage in the work of bringing the voices, leadership, and insights of people with lived experience into all of the work. We also have to recognize that there are as many circumstances and experiences of the system as there are people with lived experience. And dismissing the necessity for a city commission on lived experience because there are other such groups that exist, smacks of tokenism. And it really denies the city and their constituents the opportunity to leverage this unique and vital asset, which might actually lead the way to ending homelessness.
Caller, thank you so much. That was 2 minutes. Thank you for your comment. The next caller is the caller ending in 3784. You should be able to unmute. And please state your name and items you'd like to speak on.
All right, Andrew Gravener, 1 minute of general public comment.
Great, please go ahead. Thanks.
All right, so first of all, I'd like to. I'm just going to take up 1 minute general public comment. But I'm going to speak briefly on items 10 through 12. All three of these items, particularly numbers 10 and 11, which are introduced by Nuri Martinez, who isn't even on the council anymore because she resigned because she's a racist gerrymander. And also number 12 is introduced by Kevin De Leon. We should not be nothing should be considered that's introduced by those three council members. Anything that they've introduced, there's going to be some issues with it. Everything they've done needs to be investigated. There shouldn't even be any meetings until they have resigned. The three of them have resigned, Mary Gill and JDL. So especially, and also things like 4118, that needs to be abolished. But of course, none of this can start until those three have all resigned. The two remaining haven't yet, still need to. One of them has. But
Caller, you just had 1 minute. Thank you so much for your call. The next caller is the caller ending in 3712. Should be able to unmute. And please state your name and items you'd like to speak on.
Hi, Vicki Halliday. I'd like to speak on items 1 and general public comment.
Great. You've got 2 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you. From where I sit at my desk right now, it's about 60 feet from the front gate of the 100 Sunset Bridge housing. I know that you're going to renew this lease today. That's probably a given, but I need to ask some things of you. This particular site is not a success model. It's left residents around here, house residents, with nothing but anger as a weapon. The Z zone, which was created, that would have prohibited some encampments, extra garbage cleanup, all sorts of things, has not been adhered to. I mean, the signs are still up, but a lot of that is not enforced. We had a murder in front of this bridge housing, guy shot at the bus stop. The bus stop is such that average people can't use it. I had jury duty recently. I needed to leave here at 6:15 in the morning. There was no way that I could go in front of bridge housing and wait on a bus to go downtown. So I had to take an expensive Uber. I'm just asking that you go back and reassess the promises that were made to this neighborhood, and you get rid of the dual residences, the people who live in bridge housing and still keep a tent up around here. There would be a CIS files for this, but too many VNC members, of which I am one, lived within the 1,000 feet. So we couldn't even, make a statement on this. It's crazy. So I just ask that you consider a lot of these issues when you renew this lease. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next caller is the caller ending in 1115. You should be able to unmute.
Yes, hi, Sean O'Brien. I'd like to speak on, I believe it's item 1 and item 9.
Great.
And general comment.
Okay, 3 minutes then. 2 minutes for the items and 1 minute general. Thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think it's item 9 with the LASA reports. I'd like to amend that, have you guys amend that. I don't know why you got to put in a number of, what is it, like 10 people. It seems like there's something that they're trying to play games with on how the reports will be generated and how they will be required. So if you could amend that and take out the number of people, that would be great. On item 1, Sunset Avenue, it's been a complete failure. It's known that it's been infiltrated with gangs and drugs. It's wreaked havoc on the community around it. The dual residency is a huge problem that has never been addressed. The SEC zones are not being enforced. So, like Vicky said previously, we all know you guys are going to approve this, which is a shame that it was the promises that were made weren't adhered to, did not come to fruition. And it was only supposed to be 2 or 3 years, and now you're extending it. I would like you to amend that this would be a one-time only extension and have it sunset in a year. So if you can amend the item with that, so next year you can't come back and say, oh, let's renew it for another year. General public comment, it's a shame that the city can't find a way to deal with 0.70% of the population, despite spending billions of dollars. Nowhere in here in dealing with this crisis, it has anything to do with personal accountability. We're treating these people that are living on the street with kid gloves and too much empathy, too much carrot, not enough stick. If you're offered services and you refuse them, then you just can't stay. The Boise decision just requires shelter. It doesn't require. It does not require housing. It's shelter. We got to fix this. And the way you guys are doing it, you all seem to be career politicians. Nobody wants to make the difficult choices. And you just want to talk about it. You just want to do meeting after meeting, study after study, create new commissions. It's ridiculous. We know what the problem is. We know how to address it, but nobody wants to stick their neck out because it might affect their future political job. Thank you for your time. Please vote no, or please amend item 1 and make this a one-time only and end the madness. Thank you.
Thanks. Next caller is the caller ending in 0093. You should be able to unmute.
Hi, my name is Kristen Astor, and I'm calling to speak on agenda item number 8.
Great. You've got 1 minute. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at the People Concern. Thank you so much for the opportunity to address this committee today and for bringing forward this important motion for consideration. We strongly support this motion for the City of Los Angeles to create the proposed Commission on Lived Experience with Homelessness. The ability of people with lived experience to influence decisions that impact them is important to our agency. We regularly collect and act upon feedback from clients, manage our own interim housing community advocacy boards, and are in the process of creating an agency-wide client advisory board as part of our diversity, equity, inclusion strategic plan. We firmly believe that people closest to the problem have important insights to contribute to solutions being proposed that impact them, and we sincerely hope the City of Los Angeles will approve this commission. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your call. Next caller is the caller ending in 3597. Should be able to unmute. Caller ending in 3597. Can you state your name and the items you'd like to speak on?
Hi, 8911 public comment.
Okay, you've got 3 minutes.
Wonderful.
2 minutes for the items and 1 minute for general. Please go ahead.
Okay. As lived experience, it's definitely important for us to have a body of people to actually help alleviate the homeless crisis. The key word is non-responsive, not responding. Since 2013, the Kingdom Warriors Foundation has worked in Skid Row as a lived experience with domestic violence for women specifically. Resources where hundreds of clients went through LAFA and still end up on the street. So if we're creating a lived experience board, the first people that we need at the table is Wendy Jane Gruhl, the LA commissioner that was elected by Garcetti to oversee LAFA and all of the homeless process. First, we need a letter of support from this homeless committee, Ms. Rahman, specifically for the $150 million of HUD funding that was returned back from LAFA to finance all of these projects to come. There is plenty of land out here, and you have not listened to one project or plan that lived experience people has submitted to you, starting with Mark Ridley Thomas. So we're asking you today that if you really do want to form a board of lived experience people, you have to listen and administer and execute the plan of action that was laid before you. We had applied for $75,000 through Mark Ridley Thomas for outreach and engagement. That's what we do. You cannot solve the homeless crisis without outreach and engagement. So this is what we request for all of the encampments of 4118. The people, where are you going to place them? So allow lived experience organizations that have applied for funding in the tune of $1.7 million to be returned immediately so we can actually solve the homeless crisis. The Kingdom Warriors Foundation, Dr. Truth Bay, and Mellow Desire. Mellow Desire has proposed since 2013, and he did nothing but talk shit, no plan. And your staff, you train your staff to be less than cordial and uninformable. Yvette Lechuga, the daughter of Karen Bass, actually submitted a letter of support for us, but still there's no resources, nor we're at the table. So this lived experience board, please email the link to info@onepercentage.org of the application process for this lived experience group that we request to be the head of that table. That's $151.7 million. Los Angeles requires to send back for a new COC public funding, a public account so everyone can submit their projects, build housing with no funding or zoning restrictions in mind.
Thank you, caller.
You guys are not knowledgeable.
You
Thank
just
you.
had 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Next caller is the caller ending in 8215. You should be able to unmute. And please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on. Caller ending in 8215. I think you're unmuted, so we should be able to hear you.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Had a mute on my phone, too.
Oh, good.
Dexter O'Connell with Safe Place for Youth in Venice. Like to speak on number 1, number 7, number 8, and general public comment, if that's all right.
Yeah, you've got 2 minutes for the items and 1 minute for general. So please go ahead.
Very good. I'll take them in order. Thank you very much to Councilmember Rahman for bringing so much high quality Progressive legislation to the fore. I think we all know why that is. Great job. Safe Place for Youth is in support of the Bridge Home at 100 Sunset and encourages the committee to renew the lease and forward it through to City Council to renew the lease as well. We are the sublessor from past for that Bridge Home, and we feel that it has actually been a tremendous success. The young people in our programs have used the Bridge Home to obtain stability and move forward into permanent housing and reunifications and other stable situations, which they would not have achieved without that Bridge Home. And we're extremely grateful for the city for the opportunity to participate in this program, and we look forward to continuing to participate in it until Metro turns that property into permanent supportive housing, and not a day less than that. We are actually being audited by LASA today on the success of that program, and we look forward to sharing that information with the members of council in support of this lease renewal as well. On item number 7, we are supportive of the regular audits of place-based interventions, and more data on that particular style of intervention we believe will help to refine the tactics used and make those kinds of interventions more successful. Additionally, in terms of the Commission of Lived Experience, we believe that it is extremely important to listen to those with lived experience of homelessness, and I want to echo particularly what Zeke Sandoval from PASS said earlier about ensuring that we listen to people who have recent lived experience of homelessness. Safe Place for Youth programs include our own set of feedback mechanisms for our members to provide information to our staff, both on the ground and at the senior level. Anyone who doubts the effectiveness of that approach should speak to council staff who attended the Venice Youth Network meeting last month about the power of the voices on the panel to communicate information about what was going on in their lives and what they needed, as well as the embodied solidarity that was shown in terms of making sure that others have an understanding of what's necessary for holistic health and well-being in this difficult time. That, I think, is it. So I'll yield the balance of my time, except that I will also echo that Councilmember De Leon and Councilmember Cedillo should resign. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. Next caller is the caller ending in 7742. Should be able to unmute.
Good morning. My name is Bernita Walker, and I am the CEO for Project Peacemakers. We work with victims of domestic violence. We have been up, and I've been in the field.
What items do you want to speak
on?
I'm
sorry, number 8. Number 8. I'm sorry.
Okay, sounds good. You've got 1 minute. Please go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I have been in the field of domestic violence for 43 years, and I am a Native American, Angelino. I've been here for 76 years. And as I look around our streets and I see what's going on, and then I talk to the people who are homeless, I'm hearing the pain inside of them because of lack of what needs to be done in homeless situations. So I'm asking you to create the Lived Experience Commission and really listen to those that are on that lived experience, because they have a lot to offer and able to help individuals. We see a number of victims coming through domestic violence with children who end up sleeping in the cars quite often because of the fact of the lack of funds and the lack of empathy in what they're going through. So please consider that Lived Experience Commission. It is needed. And I thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, caller. That is it for our general public comment. So, Madam Chair, you may proceed.
Okay, great. So I'm going to recommend that we take a few of these items on consent. But I do want to read what is hopefully not a major amendment to item 9 before I recommend that we take it on consent. So item 9 is the request for monthly reports for place-based interventions. And I'm gonna amend that item to say, rather than monthly reports, to be releasing quarterly reports. And rather than for any intervention with 10 or more individuals, that it be increased to 25 or more unhoused individuals. So it would be reducing the number of reports to quarterly rather than monthly, and increasing the number of individuals at that location from 10 to 25 for place-based interventions for item 9. And at this time, okay, are there any objections to that amendment? This for item 9.
Yeah. Not an objection, maybe just a clarification.
Mm-hmm.
When you say 10 or more, just to make sure that that's not just a particular site, but it could be a series of sites. And what I'm thinking of, like when we did the encampment to home 4118 on my underpasses, none of them had more than 10 people on them, but collectively there were more than 10. And I faced a lot of resistance to that from service provider initially. And I'd like those kinds of things to be the ones where we get the feedback, so we know if it's working and if their people are actually getting housed in the long term. So my point is, when you say 10 or more at a location, I just say location or locations, location or group of locations, just because in the case of my district, where most of the encampments are relatively small, we tend to do batches.
Well, okay, so why don't we do this, Councilmember Bloomfield? Why don't we pull that from consent, and we can discuss this amendment a little bit more, because I just want to clarify where you're at and what I was saying. So let's.
I mean, I think we're on the same page, but yeah, we can talk about it.
Let's just make sure that we have the numbers right, and so that anybody who's listening in from the public also can follow. So I'm going to recommend that we take items 1, 2, and 3, which are the 3 municipal facilities committee reports on consent. I'm going to recommend that we take items 5 and 6 on consent, which are the 2 PSH projects. Yeah, supportive housing projects. And I would recommend that we take 10, 11, and 12 on consent. These are about, these are report backs about data and options for other pit counts. But they're not, I don't believe any of them are asking for LAHSA to do something immediately. And 12 is the HAP item. So if everyone here is comfortable, that's 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 10, 11, and 12. And so we would be discussing 4, 7, 8, 9, and 13. Is everyone on board?
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay, great. So Mr. Verano, can you call the roll on those items?
Councilmember Rahman.
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino. Councilmember Buscaino is absent. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Aye.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
3 ayes, and these items are approved.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and start with item 9, since we were already discussing that. Mr. Verano, can you read item 9 into the record, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Item number 9 is a motion, Bonin Rahman et al., relative to requesting the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority to release monthly reports for 1 year following any place-based intervention in the city involving more than 10 unhoused individuals, and improving the city's policies regarding such interventions and related matters.
Great, thank you so much. I can briefly state that the hope in putting forward this motion was really to think about having data on different approaches to addressing homelessness. We have really focused on the CES, which is prioritize people based on vulnerability in terms of getting people into housing interventions. Parallel to that, in part because of new housing interventions that have come through related to the LA Alliance settlement, we've had a number of place-based or geographically focused interventions that the city has undertaken. And this was a motion really to get more data on how effective those interventions are and their outcomes, so that we can, think about what works and make better decisions about how we allocate our funding going forward. So the two amendments that I had wanted to add to this item were really just to reduce the number of reports from monthly to quarterly, and to increase the size of the encampment being addressed from 10 or more individuals to 25 or more individuals. But it sounded like, Councilmember Blumenfield, that you may have a challenge with the increase in size. And I hear you, because we have the same challenge in our district as well.
And I thought maybe a way to massage that a little bit is, because I agree with you in terms of trying to focus the reporting. And I'm a fan of place-based interventions, and it's really one of the very early ones. I got a lot of pushback on it from trying to do a place-based intervention. And I don't know that it would have qualified under the 10 or more, because there were 12 locations, each one with approximately between maybe less than 25, but maybe 10 people, 10, 12 people in them. So collectively, it was more than 25.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that we capture those kinds of things. So when you talk about more than changing it from 10 to 25, we just make it clear somehow that the place can be a series of places as long as it's one effort. So we're not capturing every little encampment that is where there's an intervention, but we're capturing initiatives. And maybe I wasn't thinking about it, so I haven't really written this yet. But
yeah,
when it says reports for 1 year following any place-based intervention.
Yeah.
Just it may be just a sentence that afterwards say intervention can include more than one specific location. How about that?
I mean, I guess, can I ask, sorry to interject, but can I ask a question? Isn't the whole purpose of it is to ascertain the data and the value based on this approach rather than the scale? It's about the approach and the how and the strategy and how it's working. Correct?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
So the number doesn't matter. I think it's more so about what are the results of these efforts? How is it sustained? How are these placements? How do they work more than less than other processes? And I think that's what you're trying to get to, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, so Councilmember Blumenfield, if we kept the original number of 10, would your intervention still fall under that category? So I had actually, when I crafted, worked on this motion initially, 10 seemed to me a number that would get at exactly the question that we're trying to get at in the motion, while still accounting for the fact that the nature of encampments in certain parts of the district are just smaller than in other areas, while still still allowing us to be able to kind of evaluate the place-based method. And so maybe if we just left it at 10 rather than trying to increase it to 25, that might.
I think that would solve it. I mean, because as I said, I think about the particular example, which was the biggest place-based intervention that we did, which was the underpasses in my district, and 10 would cover it, but 25 would not unless you covered them all. So if you want to leave that at 10 and move the other thing to quarterly, I think then that makes me comfortable. Or if you want it higher, I can work on some language to.
I actually would prefer 10 as well. So I think let's keep it there. I think.
Well, I'm gonna interject and just say I think the quarterly report makes sense, because I think honestly I think it's excessive to do anything more than that, and you wouldn't actually garner anything, number one. But number two, I think, Mr. Blumenfield, to your point, I think it's more about the strategy and less about the number. And I think the truth of the matter is that many of us, myself included, I don't derive any value from 10 or more because I've cleared the largest encampment in my district, and I'm trying to think of outside of the work that we're doing with RVs, I can't look at a concentration of 10 or more. So, you know, for me, it's more about the strategy than it is about the number. And so I like the idea that it's about, if you talk about 10 or more, that it's not from just a single encampment, because I don't know if that, again, the dynamics and the circumstances of some of the individuals and what warrants, what placements are warranted is wholly derived on the individual circumstance. And as we know, there's not one single circumstance.
Yeah. I think the hope was that the number was included initially only to differentiate it from, let's say if there's an encampment with 2 tents or 2 or 3 tents, you know, I think there are often interventions that work there that are not deliberately place-based interventions, that are not, you know, focused, targeted in a particular geographic area and, you know, are part of a place-based program. And I think we wanted to be able to differentiate this, this data gathering from kind of the normal way that interventions work in neighborhoods. And so that's why the original number was included. And I'm trying to think of a way in which you could take away the number and still kind of identify it as a place-based intervention.
Well, it's an intervention that's based on the geography rather than the CES, rather than the acuity standard. I mean, that's the main, that was the point of friction, frankly, with the service providers who did not want to do anything that was not acuity based. And it was the council that pushed to have some place-based interventions that we said, look, we have a hotspot that is causing a problem in the community. We know if we went and offered the folks in that area assistance as a group, we could actually make a difference. And just anecdotally, we've seen that, because a lot of the people wouldn't move except if they moved together, which makes sense. And that they formed a community. So they're going to go from one location to another.
Right.
And that never would have happened if it was just based on the CES acuity standard versus the place-based.
So my one of the reasons why we had made the initial change from monthly to quarterly was to reduce the burden of reporting on LAHSA a little bit. I think monthly would have been a very onerous requirement. The challenge is, I think, or the question I have is whether the way in which we're thinking about this aligns with the ways in which LAHSA is able to pull data and provide information. And I wonder whether there's someone here from LAHSA who could maybe speak to that question or speak to the discussion that we've been having. Is anyone from LAHSA available?
Good morning. Yes, Nathaniel Vergao, Deputy Chief of Systems at LAHSA.
Great. Do you think that you could speak to this, to the way in which we could structure the request for data here that would get at the information that Councilmember Blumenfield and I are looking to get from this kind of data gathering?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been listening to the discussion, and from my perspective, one of the keys is going to be having a clear trigger that that all council members, CAO, LAHSA, everybody involved would know that this is one of those interventions that we should be reporting on. So that would differentiate it from any 4118 activity or 5611 activity or other place-based strategies the city may have. So finding a way to define that trigger so that we we know to start tagging the data within HMIS. Around the question of the HMIS structure, I understand where Councilmember Blumenfield is coming from in relation to his district and others, where there may be a strategy that straddles a larger geography but has multiple small encampments. So
And
the struggle, I'm sorry,
Daniel,
the struggle there is
in that I did want to say that in those encampments, I think Councilmember Blumenfield did clarify that each of those sites did have more than 10 individuals.
Well, some, not each of them, but some of them did.
So where, and I guess this comes back to that trigger. If there is, if the city is intending to do a geographically focused intervention that would include, focused outreach, focused services, including interim housing and permanent housing, the way has been done with other place-based strategies. I wouldn't be as concerned with the number. So let me back up. So in HMIS, the way we would best be able to track this, we have in our outreach module, we have the ability to draw encampments essentially, and to be able to attach profiles of individuals to those encampments, and that's how we would track the interventions. When those individual encampments cross a large geography, it would not make sense to draw them as one large encampment, because that may then incorporate, in drawing that may incorporate some encampments in the middle that are not intended for that place-based strategy, some individuals, some tents, etc. So we would want to draw them as multiple small circles. So again, it's for me, it's less about the specific number necessarily, and about the trigger of knowing for sure what we are being required to track. Where we had given feedback on the number was concern where we saw initially with the 4118 strategy this fall, where there was a flood of locations that was really difficult for outreach to get to in a timely manner to be able to do the encampment assessment forms. And so wanting to be able to have a mechanism with you all to reflect back capacity constraints, both in terms of resources around these strategies, but also in terms of the resource constraints around data tracking and reporting. So that's where I would ask for some version of a mechanism similar to what was done with 4118 this fall, where there were specific triggers. So am I making myself clear? I feel like I'm rambling a little. I apologize.
I think you said exactly what I was saying, Nathaniel, because it is less about the number. It's more about tracking what the outcomes are associated with those place-based placements, correct? And so long as we give you guys the instruction or the direction to figure out what works best, knowing the data that it is that we're trying to derive, could we provide the flexibility for you to come back and give us some of what that model might look like?
Yeah,
based on what the experience is? Yes,
I think that would be valuable for us to if you could amend to report back initially with a goal to move forward with the data reporting that would allow us to work with CIO and others to make sure that we have a clear model for you all to vote on, so it's not, so that there isn't confusion later on down the line with any council member thinking they had done a place-based intervention, but lost of not being clear that that's what they were intending and not having tracked it in the way that they were wanting.
Okay, I'm not quite sure I'm following what the request or the requested change would be here.
So the requested change would be to start with a report back on a model. And I would defer to you all in terms of the timeline for that report back, that we could present to you specifics around what potentially a trigger could be, how we would define place-based interventions, and any, that way I could get specific feedback also from our data team, whether my concerns about the separation of encampments is valid, or if there are workarounds that they may know that I don't.
Well, so rather than, Councilmember Bloomfield, did you have something specific to this? I was just going to ask procedurally, would it be possible for us to just continue this to the next meeting and have you come back with a definition of a place-based model that then we could move forward on?
And
yeah, go ahead.
Couldn't we just designate place-based models when we're doing them? When you're doing an intervention that's place-based, call it as such. Or as a council office, when we're working with you on a strategy, we say, this is place-based. We want you to go to this location, that location, as opposed to, just doing the usual outreach and CES style. It seems pretty apparent to me. I know with my team, when we're doing a place-based initiative or not, it's when we've talked to you guys and we've talked to you about a particular location that we're going to do an intensive outreach. So do we even need to go beyond that? Can't we just, as it goes forward, just don't have a number in there, but just it's place-based when we say it's place-based because we're choosing a location?
Yeah, I think the only challenge with having it be designated by council offices is that we would want to have it be as uniform as possible across the city. And we want to ensure that we're comparing like to like when we're looking at different interventions. And we don't want to leave particular interventions that may fit the bill out, nor put in interventions that may not fit the bill. And so, I think that's where I'm having a little bit of a challenge here with leaving it up to individual council offices to designate what kind of intervention is what.
Councilwoman, this is John Wickham with the Chief Legislative Analyst.
Mm-hmm.
I think to your point previously, if you would like to hold this in committee until your next meeting, the CLA, CAO, and LASA could get together and come up with a couple of suggestions on how to address the concerns that you've raised in committee.
Great.
And I think it might also be helpful to do so in the context of the key performance indicators that you'll be receiving a presentation on later today, because some of that data will actually be coming forward in that format. There might be a way to bring all of this together in a way that's productive to you. And I think we just might need a couple of weeks to sort that all out.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable with that recommendation. And I think it makes, rather than having 1,000 different requests for information that are bringing back things which may not allow us to really compare effectiveness between different interventions, having a little bit more coordination between them, I think would be really helpful. So why don't we do that? Council members Blumenfield and Rodriguez, are you comfortable with that?
Yep.
Okay, great. Fantastic. All right. So do we need to vote on that?
We do not, Madam Chair. Just to confirm, you're continuing the item, correct?
Yes, that's right. Fantastic. Okay. I'm glad we're all on the same page. So let's move on to let's do item 4. Mr. Verano, can you read item 4 into the record?
Yes. Item number 4 is a City Administrative Officer report relative to the expansion of University of Southern California street medicine services in the city.
Great. And I think we have someone here to make a presentation.
Good morning,
Yes.
Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Sophia Peralta. As you can see, I am not Brian Buckner. Unfortunately, he was not able to be here as he is currently testifying before the Assembly Budget Subcommittee, which is holding a hearing today on homelessness in Los Angeles. However, with me here is Brett Feldman, Director of USC's Street Medicine Program and an internationally recognized expert in street medicine. The CEO prepared this report in response to a council office motion that instructed our office, with assistance of relevant partners and city departments, to report back on the status of the city's partnership with the USC Strip Medicine Program and to identify funding and options for expanding the program. We believe the Street Medicine Program is extremely effective, provides a critical and life-saving service to hundreds of unhoused Angelenos, and is worth expanding. We recommend expanding the city's street medicine program with the addition of 2 full-time teams in the current fiscal year, bringing the total to 3 city-funded teams with the possibility of further expansion in the future. Brett will now take about 5 or so minutes to give more information and detail about the current program, the proposed expansion, including how the expansion areas were identified, how many more people would be served with this expansion, and what the teams do and will continue to work collaboratively with other system partners, and why this is an important step for the city to take now when it appears street medicine programs are expanding in other areas in the city and in the county. So I'll pass it on to Brett.
Okay. Thank you so much. As she said, my name is Brett. I'm the Director for Street Medicine at USC. I'm also on the board of the International Street Medicine Institute. My role in the Institute is to provide technical assistance to 160 programs around the world, 10 of which are in Los Angeles. And I've been doing this work for 15 years, but I have to say, representing the city of LA and serving our unhoused neighbors in the last year has been one of the greatest joys of my life. And of course, how we serve is through street medicine. And so in street medicine, we recognize that people experiencing unsheltered homelessness just can't access care the way the rest of us do. So we go to them in a assertive way, first to deliver a tender love, because that's the only thing I know for sure works, and then the same quality of care on the street, under the bridges, in the woods, or wherever they are that you would expect in a brick and mortar clinic. And we do it this way because we know that that's what's required to be successful. They have so many barriers that to accessing other types of care and services that we would have too, that this is the just thing to do and the equitable thing to do. And so when we go to them, we deliver full service primary care and recognize that healthcare is much more than a doctor's visit. So all on the street, we dispense medications, draw labs, we do ultrasound and EKGs. We also do a very high level of mental health care. When indicated, we use long-acting injectable antipsychotics, that it's 1 injection for a month, so that we don't have to worry about the meds getting lost or stolen. We know that it's in there. Also, we do treatment for substance use disorder with medication-assisted therapy, needle exchange, and of course, hand out naloxone. And so these are just some pictures. You can see what it looks like in practice. This is Dr. Olson doing ultrasound on a tailgate. Corinne, one of our PAs, doing a very high level of complex wound care. And I also wanted to mention we have the only HIV street medicine program in the county, possibly the country. We don't know of any others. And I wanted to talk about why we prefer street medicine over a mobile van, especially for this population. And I'm not disparaging mobile vans. They have their place and help a lot of people. But for this population, when a van parks, it becomes a fixed site. So for the same reasons why somebody can't leave their encampment to walk a few blocks to a brick and mortar clinic, they also can't leave their encampment to walk a few blocks to the mobile van. But probably more importantly, there's a philosophical difference. In street medicine, we want to be able to suspend our reality and meet them in their reality where they feel most comfortable, to intentionally flip that power dynamic in their favor. If we park in proximity and we take them out of their environment onto ours that we've probably even licensed, we flip that power dynamic back to us where we don't want it. And so this is what we've been up to over the past year. Of course, you have to hire and train a team. So it took a little bit to get started, but we still surpassed our 1,400 visits we were contracted for the county. You can see in the blue, monthly, we would see between 150 to 175 patients. Right now, the same team with the same resources is about 250, which would be maximized. But we also have a public health role too. This was really highlighted during COVID, but we're constantly managing other outbreaks too, like syphilis. Actually, we're doing syphilis right now. Lice, scabies, we've done typhus, hepatitis A, some things that you might not know that we do is we monitor food and water safety, as well as personal and encampment hygiene, which of course benefits not just the people that live there, but the public at large. And then because we're an academic medical institution, we do a ton of surveying so that we can really get the people's view of what is coming to them, because that's the most important point of view. And we use this to inform all of our programming. We're happy to share this data with the city because I know it's hard for you guys to get a lot of data as well to help you decide where you're going to allocate your resources to. Aside from just healthcare, there's a value in housing and outreach as well. We collaborate with the Circle team, who, by the way, that 84% that say they have not been outreached to, I expect that number to get much better with the Circle team. They do an excellent job. But we also work with LASA and the People's Concern. And what we found is that people are much more likely to engage with us over their healthcare than to give their personal information to somebody with a clipboard. So we work together as a team. And as you know, housing takes a while, and we keep them engaged, moving them forward with their physical health, mental health, substance use, so that when housing does come through, number one, we know where they are because we've been following them. And number two, they're more housing ready, maybe not even using their substances, and housing is more likely to be successful. And so we've shown that street medicine can be a catalyst to housing. We had a 38% housing placement rate last year. This, of course, was cushioned by Project Roomkey, but I think what it shows is that if the units are available, we will get the right people in them quickly. So these are the areas that we would love to expand to. The yellow is our current areas with one team, and the red is where we would love to go to work with our community partners and be given the opportunity to just love on the people as much as we can while they're on the street, see them into housing, and then love on them in housing even more. We chose these areas because we were able to match the areas of the highest need where there was little to no street medicine. Now I'll see if there are any questions.
Great. Well, thank you for that presentation. I love all the love. And I think we've worked I'm not sure whether you've interacted directly with my team, but I personally have interacted with the Healthcare in Action team, which is following a similar model to you, and actually watched as they were able to refer somebody into rehab immediately. Like they came out, they met someone, they were ready to go into rehab, and they found them in bed that day. And so I've really seen the way in which these healthcare teams operate effectively on the ground. I wanted to open up the floor for questions from other committee members, if there are any. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Yes, I was just curious because, you know, we have the data, for example, of the interventions that we've done in partnership with the county with the therapeutic mental health van pilot that we've done, which has also resulted in even direct transport to mental health treatment facilities and county-controlled substance abuse recovery centers. And so my question is, what data and metrics have you collected thus far in terms of like from the region of where you've rolled out that you can break out on a monthly basis on what those interventions are so that we can assess the return on the investment for the services that are being provided? Because I know, for example, with Circle, we still don't have real substantive data. And so while we continue to allocate additional resources, I think what's critically important is that we're able to measure it in a very real way. That actually, because we can anecdotally cite a lot of examples, but you know what we have, for example, with the fire department tracking and from County Department of Mental Health is we actually have like the exact number of individuals that have been, you know, enrolled into treatment facilities or taken, you know, because they're county controlled facilities. And so my question is how are you measuring that work, and how are you, what you know, kind of, because remind me again, I'm sorry, I apologize. This commenced in these geographic areas at what point?
So in those areas which were funded through the city, it's been 1 year.
Okay, it's been 1 year. Okay. And so, and then what the anticipated growth is going to look like? What does the deployment look like in terms of, what precipitates your deployment to those areas? Is it just we're driving around and we identify that, could you help elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So even though we have been with the city for a year, I've been doing this for 15, and there's lots of different ways that we identify where to go. To answer your first question on the data and metrics, we have three main buckets of metrics that we collect. If there's anything we're not collecting that you'd be interested in, we'd be happy to add it. So the first bucket is on the individual patients. So these are all registered USC patients. Their medical record looks just like any other USC patient's medical record. So we track their health metrics like hypertension, diabetes, treatment for mental health disorders, substance use disorders. So we have all of that data. And there's core health metrics that we use for that. The second type are more public health data. So I shared one of the metrics, which are one of our standard questions we ask everybody are you working with anybody else? Because we want to know who we can collaborate with. We found that a lot of folks weren't working with other people. So we started collecting that data. So we found 84% had not been outreach to, but we also collect, for example, their accessibility to food. We know that the majority of our patients eat less than a meal a day, and a lot of them eat 2 to 3 meals a week. Their access to clean water, toilets, over 90% don't have access to 24-hour toilets, so they're forced to openly defecate. So these are public health measures that we collect. And then lastly are the housing metrics. And since we don't do housing directly, we don't own units or anything like that, we collect metrics on all the different things that it takes to get to housing. So if we got their ID, if we've submitted paperwork for housing, if they've been approved for housing, and then finally, if they've been moved in for housing. I think the perception is that housing is the only barrier, to solving homelessness. And I know you guys all know more than that, but so we want to know where the cogs are along the way and try and work at each one of those. So we have data that we collect on all three of those and are always happy to share it because I know that you need it too, and it'll help you make your decisions.
Well, I think it's important, one of the motions, and we're talking about, look, there's a number of, we have a number of bifurcated efforts, we'll just say, that have been financed. And I think the bigger problem is, and this is where, why, look, there's a lot of money being spent on a lot of different efforts, and we've got, we have a responsibility to the taxpayers in this city that while we have a number of pilots and whatnot, and while they might be doing good work, we need to know how much we're getting, how much bang we're getting for our buck. And I think that's critically important. How are you identifying? So it's kind of roving. So, because like, for example, with TMVs, they're getting a 911 call, right? And that's how we're doing the medical clearance. We're doing all of those things. And so I think it's just important to have a systematic kind of approach that you can adequately measure. Because as we're expanding some of these territories and we're doing all of this stuff, I mean, how is that really honing in? And I want to make sure that what we're doing is actually substantively getting, helping to facilitate. This is triage. What you're providing is triage. And I appreciate that. And I get it. I'm just trying to, in terms of how we more directly connect to those that are in that immediate crises, for example, that might need that intervention. Just in terms of how are we connecting those pieces together, I guess, whether it's through LASA, whether it's through, how is that being integrated? Yeah, and I respectfully, it is a lot more than triage because we are delivering the care on the street. So we're dispensing medications on the street and be getting that treatment on the street, because even when they're connected to LASA, it's going to be months before they're housed. So meanwhile, right. and they get lost in that time, because even with the best outreach, people get frustrated. They come by and the people are like, where's my housing? And
the outreach worker says, I don't know, we're still waiting, and both parties get frustrated, they stop coming by as much, and they lose it. So we
No,
keep
I
engaged, and
no, I totally, I understand that. When I use the term triage it's the emergency response to the crisis, right? And it's providing that intervention because you have to kind of you got to treat the patient with whatever symptoms they're having, and you're providing that intervention. But it is a triage because we don't have, because it's an intervention because we don't have that long-term strategy for people. So I'm just trying to talk about how do we measure, how do we integrate, how do we better coordinate all of these efforts, because I think what we have is we have a number of independent efforts that are being deployed right now, and they need to be better integrated. So I look at this as one of value, but again, what are the costs associated with whether it's per deployment, all of those things need to be measured, and that's part of what I want to see. And then what I've continued to ask for is that we do so equally across every effort that we're deploying in the city. So it's not just, you're just the one in the hot seat right now, but I promise you this is across the board of how I approach these conversations, because, there are a lot of great and wonderful ideas and approaches and strategies for addressing what we see and are experiencing on our streets and what individuals are experiencing on their streets. For me, it's about how do we get to, rather than I'll call it the brand aid solution, for lack of a better term, but more so of the comprehensive and sustained effort that shows the metrics, the outcomes associated with that work, that we can consistently measure across all programs that are being deployed. I like, some of again, what you talked about, some of the interventions that you're talking about, healthcare interventions that you're talking about, I think are great. I just also know that, again, how are we doing this systematically? How are we measuring them consistently across the board? Because we can easily start to continue to fund and uptick the deployments of these things without really ever assessing the efficacy of those efforts, and measuring them consistently. And how is that more highly valued than another effort that we might be financing as well? And so we can continue at a feverish pace funding all of these things, but never just asking the questions of how much is this costing? How many people are we reaching? Because that's the fiduciary responsibility of this council. And sometimes we can get ahead of ourselves in just funding the solutions without really saying, okay, let's make sure we're measuring all these pieces. So I think for me, I'd like to, I'm comfortable with this, but I caution everybody, because this is the job, but I caution everybody to really start tracking what consistent metrics look like when it comes to some of these additional efforts as we expand the deployments of these types of programs. But thank you, Brett. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Councilmember Rodriguez, I couldn't agree more. I'm excited about this program. I think we see some of the areas that the expansion is proposed for are areas that are in my district, and there is a real paucity of street medicine services. So we know that there currently is a real gap in this, but I think as we, as a council, start to fund that gap, we need to know what we're funding, where we're funding, is there overlaps between existing funding projects, because now there's a lot of new projects that are coming online that are doing similar things, and really making sure that we're not being duplicative, and that we're really monitoring outcomes to make sure all of these programs are working together. And if one is working better than the other, then funding one over the other as well. So I take that call as a call to action, Councilmember Rodriguez, in moving forward. Oh, Councilmember Bloomfield, you had a comment on this?
Yes, thank you. And I completely agree about the need for metrics and what my colleagues have said so far. I also had a question about the deployment in terms of, I get it that it's on the street. What about, and in parks and in parking lots, what about at interventions like say, parking and interim sites like cabin communities, what happens to the person you're treating on the street when they get moved into a cabin? Are you still able to treat them at that point?
Yes, absolutely. We would never abandon anybody that we've taken responsibility of caring for. So wherever they move to, whether it be another encampment, into bridge housing, or into permanent supportive housing, we follow them there too. And just, to talk about the metrics, I would love to help if you guys need some recommendations on what metrics might be relevant for us and for others. I completely agree that that's one of the most needed things, and would love to help if you'd have me.
Help me understand how you follow them, and thank you for that, and the metrics is important. How you follow them into the cabin communities or bridge homes, because one of the problems that we have frankly in those areas is that they don't get a lot of the medical treatment that they need, and certainly not it's a struggle to get DMH out there, but it's obviously easier to get them to an interim site than it is finding people on the streets. One of the reasons why DMH has been so ineffective on the streets in many regards is because they spend so much time trying to find people, and they're more effective when they can actually go to a location where folks are gathered, like an interim site or a bridge home. But how would that work? Because if you start going to the interim sites, then now, which don't have the medical care, then you're going to spend your time, obviously you get a much greater bang for the buck being there. Are you going to end up spending all your time on the interim sites and not on the streets, or how does that going to work?
Yeah, so if you do that, we call that retreat from the street, and we want to avoid that. So we start on the street, and that's where we care for people. We have one key. Now, compared to the DMH, we're on the street every single day, and we really get to know the areas. And the key to that is our community health workers, who are people with lived experience in homelessness, and their job is to know the streets better than anybody. So they know they try to know where, obviously it's not 100%, where all the patients are at all times, so that when we come out, we're able to find them very efficiently. And then when we get there, they are situational awareness, so we can focus 100% on the person that we're serving. So if somebody is moved in somewhere, we know that because usually we've had a hand in it, and then follow them in. But we don't pick up new patients in those sites. If we go in, it's following somebody that we've already cared for on the street.
So you go into an interim site and you have, 3 or 4 people that you were serving who were on the street, but then now you're in a location where there's a lot of people who need medical who are homeless as well, but they're living in the interim site. How do you ignore that?
Yeah, it's hard, and it's part of, we talked about triage, but it's part of the triage of what happens. As there's a whole lot of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness, and we can't care for all of them. So while they're in an interim site, they have a lot more resources than the folks do on the street. They should have caseworkers. There's telephones that they can connect them to televisits with clinics and brick and mortar clinics. If they ask us to help, we will help connect them to a different clinic who should be able to help them. But when we started this program in LA, we had to make a decision. Are we going to do street medicine and focus on the folks on the street, or are we going to try and see everybody across the continuum? I came from Philadelphia, and there we called it a homeless-centered medical home, where we had clinics in the shelters and soup kitchens and on the street, and saw people in the hospital. And when we came here, we decided to focus on the people on the street because that's who needed it the most. We still have, I know there was a question about, it was like, almost like who's first? How do we decide who we see first? And so we do work with the hospitals and have a hospital consult service for people that are admitted for something, likely to need follow-up for something. So that's how we identify some people who are most in need, one of the ways that we do.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. So I think, you know, I'm comfortable moving this forward and look forward to working with the other council members on this committee to ensure that we are thinking about how we hold these kinds of interventions accountable in the future, coordinate across them, and communicate with the county because they're also doing similar things. So, oh, wait, I had a question for you. Which is about funding. So one of the things that we are really excited about, Brett, is about the possibility of enrolling people in Medi-Cal who are experiencing homelessness through the change in the law. I think that was instituted earlier this year. And so I know that we're putting money into this program. I want to make sure that we're utilizing that opportunity to ensure that additional city dollars don't have to go into funding this program if new patients being enrolled are also being enrolled in Medi-Cal that can pay for your services on an ongoing basis. Can you talk a little bit more about that opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. So this past December was the first time we were allowed to even seek reimbursement for care on the street. Before when you bill for services, you bill for what you do and where you do it. And they didn't recognize the street as a legitimate place to deliver care. So now they do, but a lot of street medicine, actually all street medicine providers did not have contracts with the managed care organizations because it wasn't legal to provide care on the street. So us and others are right now working with them to get these contracts in place. So the hope is that you would not be funding this forever, and that we would be able to get reimbursement from the insurance companies because you know, it's like 75% or so of our patients are insured or become insured eventually.
Right. And so our costs then would only be for the initial costs to go out and seek patients to be enrolled, right? Essentially,
so
almost like startup costs.
Yeah, so some of them would be startup costs if you wanted to attach any sort of housing type interventions on with us, and then some of the public health, because with the insurance companies, they're focused on individual patients. But if we're treating syphilis in an encampment, or lice in an encampment, you want everybody treated. So you know, there might be some to that, but it wouldn't be to the extent it is now. Not even close.
Okay, well, we look forward to working on that as well, with not just with you, but with all of the street medicine providers that we're working with across the city, and also looking at whether some of our existing programs can be moved into that kind of funding model. So I'm ready to move this item forward, approving the CAO's recommendations. Mr. Verano, can you please call the roll?
Councilmember Rahman.
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino. Councilmember Buscaino is absent. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Aye.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
3 ayes, and this item is approved.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Sophia. Let's move on to item 7. Mr. Verano, can you read the item into the record, please?
Item number 7 is a City Administrative Officer report relative to all interim housing solutions open within the city as of July 1st, 2022, and all interim housing solutions and permanent supportive housing open within the city, including city-funded and non-city funded beds and units.
Great, and we have Elvia Garcia here from the CAO to make a brief presentation on this item. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Committee. I'm Elvia Garcia with the Office of the CAO. On January 27, 2022, Council requested a report back on all interim housing solutions available in the City of LA. This report presents the data provided by LAHSA. The data shows that there are 14,475 interim housing beds available throughout the city as of July 1st, 2022, with a subset of 379 of those beds that exclusively serve women. The data provided was for both city and non-city funded interim housing solutions. The report contains 2 tables, one showing the number of beds available by population served, and the other table provides a breakdown by council district. This report recommends that LAHSA provide this data on an ongoing annual basis and includes a recommendation that the Los Angeles Housing Department provide data on permanent supportive housing solutions throughout the city for both city and non-city funded solutions on an ongoing annual basis as well. This concludes my report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alvia. Council members Rodriguez and Blumenfield, do you have any questions on this item? No? Okay, this seems fairly straightforward to me. In terms of moving this forward, I want to make an amendment to the recommendations here. And I'd like to, there are two recommendations that were in this original report, and I would like to amend them into just one, which says instruct the city administrative office in coordination with the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority and the Los Angeles Housing Department to report back quarterly on all interim housing beds and all PSH units within the city of LA, including city funded and non-city funded beds and units. Report should include analysis of any increase or decrease of beds or units over time. So if the other committee members are comfortable with that amendment.
So the amendment is just to include housing in it, the housing department?
Include it's changing the recommendations from instructing LASA to having CAO be the reporting authority. Because the CAO would liaise with both.
Yep.
Essentially, right? It will be the node that will liaise with
convener.
Yes, exactly, with both LAHD and LASA in order to be able to provide this information to us.
Okay.
But there is one change, which is that we're asking for the reports to be quarterly, not annually. Okay, so if you're comfortable with that, I'd like to move the CAO report's recommendations as amended. Mr. Verano, can you please call the roll?
Councilmember Rahman.
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino. Councilmember Buscaino is absent. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Aye.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Aye.
3 ayes, and this item is approved as amended.
Great, thank you. So now let's move on to item 13, which is the summary from LASA on the roadmap. Mr. Verano, can you read the item into the record?
Yes, Madam Chair. Item number 13 is a verbal update from the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority relative to the Project Room Key Demobilization Plan and LASA's System Key Performance Indicators and related matters.
Great, and we have Nathaniel here from LASA to provide this report.
Good morning, council members. So these are two separate reports. One specifically Project Room Key Demobilization. The other is a larger report on a larger data project that is the System Key Performance Indicators. Do you have a preference for which I start with? I would suggest Room Key, but I'm open. Okay.
Go ahead.
Jorge from our team has some slides for us. If you're able to project those, Jorge, that would be fantastic. If you can. Thank you very much. As stated earlier, my name is Nathaniel Vergara. I'm the Deputy Chief of Systems for LASA, and I'm here to give you all an update on the demobilization of our Project Room Key sites funded by the City of Los Angeles. Next slide, please. So as of our last presentation, we had 3 sites operational within the city. Those are Highland Gardens, the Airtel Plaza Hotel, and the Grand Hotel. These numbers that you see before you are reported as of as of yesterday, 10/26. I will add an amendment to this, knowing that at the Highland Gardens, the last 3 participants at that site did exit the site yesterday. And so we did not have an opportunity to update this before bringing the presentation to you all, but Highland Gardens now is at 0 occupants and is ready to be turned over to the city for final processing of that site. Airtel Plaza was the last participants moved out last week. I believe it was Thursday last week. And so that site is also empty and has been turned over to GSD for its closeout. And at the Grand Hotel, as you can see, our goal for this week was to be at 305, and we are at 291 participants. So we are ahead of schedule with that site as well. Next slide, please. So wanted to give you an update in terms of how exits are actually happening. And so these are since the start of the demobilization. This is not the entire history of the sites, but just during the demobilization period. So for Highland Gardens, we had 29 folks placed directly into permanent housing, and only 17 of those exits were into interim housing. And there were 3 individuals that exited to institutions. I believe all 3 were hospitalized and or placed in long-term care. At the Airtel Plaza, we saw 26 permanent housing placement options, permanent housing placement exits, 128 exits to interim housing. And this is consistent with the plan for Airtel, which was initially extended knowing that there would be interim housing sites coming online around the time of the planned demobilization. And through the demobilization period at the Grand, we've seen 30 permanent housing placements thus far, and 63 exits to interim housing. And again, those other exits are folks who have exited to institutions like jails or hospitals. Next slide, please. So we have been focused significantly on increasing the flow directly into permanent housing. And to that end, over the last several weeks, we have conducted a number of permanent housing placement events where we've partnered with landlords and other partners in the permanent housing space to be able to present units to folks at each of the sites, and to be able to utilize the resources at their disposal, whether they are emergency housing vouchers, other permanent housing vouchers, or supports through time-limited subsidies. So we had an event on the 29th at the Airtel Plaza, on October 6th at Highland Gardens, and yesterday we started having our permanent housing placement team available on site at the LA Grand. So starting next week, they will be on site twice a week to do these sessions with folks at the LA Grand. These also will be available to participants who had previously exited from the LA Grand and are still looking for that permanent housing placement. Next slide, please. And I've talked about this need at other presentations, so I did want to give you all an update on individuals that are in need of a higher level of care. Last month, we were able to partner with SCAN Health Plan to bring physicians on site to do assessments for individuals that were estimated by the providers to need a higher level of care. They were able to connect 12 participants through their assessments to RCFE housing, that's residential care facilities or assisted living type of housing placements through Partners in Care Foundation. We have another 20 participants who have been assessed and are in process to be placed in enhanced residential care programs through the Department of Health Services. That is what's in common parlance referred to as board and care facilities. And then we've had another 22 folks who have been assessed for in-home support services that would be able to follow them, whether their next stop is interim housing or permanent housing, but they would be able to receive this, the services needed, care services needed to be able to maintain their independence. So 14 folks have had their medical certifications submitted, and 8 others are currently in process. So we've had a strong partnership with both Scan Health Foundation and the county on linking these folks to higher level of care. Next slide, please. And then wanted to just highlight some of the resources that we brought to bear. We have, as I flagged in previous reports, engaged with HUD Technical Assistance. They are helping our staff and the staff of the Salvation Army and the other providers working at that site to focus on unit acquisition and expanding the number of permanent housing placements out of the grant. That is the primary focus for the remainder of the demobilization period at the grant. And I would like to thank the Mayor's Office also for helping us connect with 4 DSWs through Chrysalis. These 4 staff members have been instrumental in helping our permanent housing team in collecting information from clients around their housing interests, the resources that they have at their disposal, and helping connect them to viable resources, both by vetting resources that have been suggested to us by the housing authorities, but also doing independent reach outs to private landlords in support of the housing navigation and placement teams. Next slide. I believe that's the last. So I'm open to questions on this one, and then we can move on to the key performance indicator report.
Any questions from other committee members? Nope. Okay, great. Thank you again. As I mentioned in a past meeting, your team has been a wonderful partner to us at our Highland Gardens site through the demobilization process, and we appreciate the fact that leadership at LAHSA has been closely engaged on this work and has been very careful and deliberate about steps forward. Councilmember Blumenfield, you did have a question. Oh, you might be on mute if you're speaking.
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to know, sort of with this data, how it's going to be used in terms of moving forward operational. How are you going to use it operationally moving forward?
So we've actually already used a lot of our learnings from Project Roomkey in some of the system implementation changes that we've begun this year. One of the key learnings has been the value of linking permanent housing resources directly to individuals at housing sites, both the permanent housing resource like a time-limited subsidy or a voucher, but also the necessary service of housing navigation that helps folks through the process into permanent housing. So we've been focused on that this fiscal year and are continuing that focus. Also looking to expand that for resources for folks who are unsheltered, but being able to tie the resources directly to an individual and having those resources be able to follow an individual even when they move from one type of interim housing to another has been essential. So we are diving in to see what other lessons we can learn that we can apply to the system, but definitely trying to use this data to inform responses elsewhere.
Right. And is the city directly involved in that in terms of the use of this data?
We're sharing this data on a weekly basis with council offices that have the Project Roomkey sites, as well as with the mayor's office. We've had a bi-weekly meeting with the mayor's office and others within the city to review this data and to look at how we can strategize for improving the system. So yes.
Great, thank you. That's it.
Great, thank you. And I think we can move on to the KPI presentation. Thank you. That was a good summary of what we're doing, and look forward to hearing more.
Fantastic. So again, Nathaniel Vergao, Deputy Chief of Systems. I am joined by my colleague, Emily Vaughn Henry, who is our Deputy Chief Information Officer. And today we will be walking you through some data that a data project that we've been working on for the last year with the California Policy Lab. This is The goal of this is to be able to let us have a high-level view of how our system is performing through specific indicators across our major housing interventions. So I will turn it over to Emily to begin our presentation. Emily, you're on mute.
Thank you. Good morning, council members and the public. Thank you so much for having us today. Again, I'm Emily Von Henry, Deputy CIO at LAHSA. LAHSA has the goal of becoming a data-driven organization. We want to use data to understand how the system is performing and work to improve it. A best practice is to use system performance indicators, or KPIs, to translate our system performance goals into data that we can review on a regular basis. LAHSA's leadership sets the performance goals. For example, we know we want to increase throughput into interim housing to permanent housing. We've partnered with the California Policy Lab to translate these goals into data reports that LAHSA will generate and review at the first a quarterly basis. Next slide, please. This fall, for the first time, our rehousing system is introducing a new level of transparency and accountability to our work through key performance indicators, a shared set of metrics to measure and improve how we help our unhoused neighbors. As the rehousing system lead, LAHSA is coordinating the introduction of KPIs as part of our new strategic vision for our system. Our overarching goal is to reduce unsheltered homelessness by increasing the speed and volume of people entering permanent housing and increasing successful movement from outreach to shelter to housing and from outreach directly into permanent housing. KPIs will help us equip data-driven decision-making by collecting, analyzing, and sharing regional data to track our progress towards shared goals, ultimately giving us a clear path forward as a system. Next slide, please. Data is powerful and visibility drives change. A region such as Houston have moved the needle on homelessness through collaboration and shared goals. These shared views of system-wide data will give us the tools to pinpoint the weak spots in our system and implemented targeted improvements. Until now, LAHSA, the cities and county have measured performance across multiple sets of metrics and dashboards. Many of them mandate to only cover certain city, county, state, and federal funding streams or projects at a time. This has given us a snapshot of certain programs at a micro level, but an incomplete picture on how our overall system is working. Now, thanks to the visionary multi-year investment from the Conrad and Hilton Foundation and the partnership with the California Policy Lab, the dozens of government agencies and nonprofits providers across LA County who operate our rehousing system are working together to align how we measure our effectiveness. The key performance indicators. The key performance aims to improve how our system rehouse our unhoused neighbors in 4 key ways. Next slide, please. Connect more individuals leaving on the streets into interim housing. Better prepare interim housing participants for permanent housing placements. Increase the number of people moving from interim housing into permanent housing. Reduce time from someone's system entry into permanent housing placement. Seeing data as trends will help us and our providers understand where we need to focus to move into the right direction. While we are working on drafts of our key performance indicators, we will continue to develop our overall outcomes in the upcoming months. In addition, we all recognize the current data quality is low. A key benefit to using KPIs will be to observe and prioritize the needs of our data quality improvement. For example, if we need to see move-in data and they are missing. This will help us motivate the urgency of putting more complete and more accurate information into our HMIS system. Ultimately, these KPIs will help increase transparency, communication, and alignment towards our shared goals. Next slide, please. Where do we go from here? So the first set of performance metrics that serve as a rough baseline view on how the system is performing. Next, we will spend several months working with system partners to improve our data quality by optimizing how data is collected and shared to ensure that we have the most accurate baseline possible to measure from. In early 2023, we will set shared numeric targets for each of the matrix and begin publicly reporting quarterly on our progress, and how we're reaching those targets to hold ourselves accountable for how we're performing from a system performance. For all of these matrix, we will also measure how we are achieving racial equality in delivering services to ensure we are righting past wrongs and serving those who have historically been excluded and left behind. Our commission will see the data quarterly, starting with data on the adult housing system, and then on the youth system in December, and data on the family system in March of 2023. But data from all of these three systems will be available on our regional system implementation webpage. So the information is available currently. Next slide, please. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Nathaniel.
Thank you, Emily. So for the remainder of the presentation, I'm going to walk you all through give you a first view of KPIs across 4 key program areas: outreach, interim housing, time-limited subsidies, and permanent supportive housing. I want to again reflect that this is a high-level view of our system, and one of the primary goals of this is to help us see where there are questions that we need to dive further into, and you'll see what I'm talking about as I go through. Next slide, please. So we'll start with outreach. So since 72% of people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles are unsheltered, a strong, cohesive, and full geographic coverage outreach system is critical. Approximately 214 outreach teams across the county serve more than 4,000 square miles. This includes 93 LAHSA homeless engagement teams who work closely with 70 Department of Health Service funded multidisciplinary teams, as well as the Department of Mental Health home teams who support the gravely disabled, along with other generalist teams across the county. Teams build rapport and connect their clients to services ranging from medical, mental health services to housing. Outreach has also been the lifeline, a critical lifeline in LA's street response to COVID since the beginning of the pandemic.
Nathaniel, could you just say the numbers of the outreach teams one more time?
It's approximately 214 outreach teams total, and these fluctuate annually based on funding. But I believe currently there are 70 multidisciplinary teams through DHS, and I don't have the total number of home teams off the top of my head, but I can certainly get that to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then the 214 number of teams is for the entire county?
Correct. And that would include VA teams, youth outreach, and others.
Thank you.
So outreach is the first touch point for someone experiencing homelessness, unsheltered homelessness, and an opportunity to build trust. Experienced outreach workers connect with people struggling with a variety of different challenges. For some, trust building is the critical first step. For others, they may be on a path to self-resolution and need little or no assistance from the rehousing system. But yet still others may need significant access to services that include substance abuse treatment or mental health care. Outreach teams triage people's needs and work to connect those whom they can to interim housing, but also knowing that that is not necessarily the right path for everyone that they engage with. Some folks would prefer a path that goes directly to permanent housing from the street. Next slide, please. So what we've been able to see in the data is that our REACH system is able to connect and serve more than 42,000 people annually. Over the last 3 years, only 7,000 to 8,000 of those 42,000 folks have been able to be placed into interim housing. So clearly, there's a significant gap between those that we engage and those that we can place into interim housing. And we'll get into some of the whys behind that in a little bit. But part of that is the amount of flow through interim housing that limits the turnover of beds, which limits the number of beds available to those who are unsheltered. But clearly, this is an indication of room for improvement as we look to be able to move more and more folks off the streets and into interim housing. Next slide.
Can I ask a quick follow-up on that slide? Madam Chair, you mind if I interest you with a quick follow-up? The 17 to 19% of people enrolled in street outreach that have moved into interim housing, how do you account for the people? Because there are a lot of folks who have been in interim housing but then exited voluntarily or involuntarily. So are they included in that 17 to 19%, or is it only the folks who have actually stayed in interim housing?
So it would be best if CPL were on to be able to explain better the mechanisms. My understanding of how they set up the data for us is that this would be targeting folks who have been engaged in have an engagement within that time frame by outreach. So yes, it may include folks who had been in interim housing prior and were engaged in that time period. So the 42,000 in fiscal year 2019-2020 were folks who had a new enrollment in outreach within that time period and were placed into interim housing within that time period, within that fiscal year.
Sorry for the interruption.
Did you have additional questions, Councilmember?
No, I'll wait till after it's done. I wanted to do the follow-up because we had that slide up. So
yeah,
sorry
so
to
I
interrupt.
just not an issue. I did want to flag for Nathaniel and for everyone here that I think we may lose quorum shortly, and so I think we want to make sure that we're moving through the discussion and the slides. And we still have one more item after this.
Okay, I will go quickly and or I could, if you would prefer to hold this to a following meeting, I could do that as well.
Is it a significantly longer presentation that we have?
We're probably only about halfway. And if you want to have discussion,
let's finish it up and then we can continue the discussion in the next meeting if we need to, but let's hear the presentation. And then that way people have an opportunity to absorb it and come back if need be.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're on demographics. We're encouraged by the outreach to housing. Sorry, we're encouraged by the race and ethnicity data for outreach, but see that we still have a lot of work to do. When reviewed by race and ethnicity, we're seeing each demographic group served at approximately a proportional rate to other groups and moving into interim housing at similar rates. I need to be clear though that proportional service is not equity. So given the severely disproportional rate at which Black people experience homelessness, there is definitely a significant amount of work that needs to be done here to ensure that we are, as Emily pointed out in her talking points, rectifying some of the wrongs of our systems of care. And so there's work to be done there. Next slide, please. So interim housing. Interim housing is often the first step into rehousing for someone experiencing homelessness. You can go to the next slide. It provides a place for people to escape the elements, stabilize, and focus on the next steps into permanent housing. So when we're talking about interim housing, for this report, we're talking about the entire portfolio of shelter options that are tracked in HMIS. Again, this is all data from HMIS, not from any other data source. So across the continuum, there were approximately 24,000 beds in our shelter system. And these include emergency shelters, transitional housing, safe parking, tiny homes, Project Room Key, sorry, not safe parking, safe sleeping, Project Tiny Homes, Project Room Key, and Project Home Key, as well as the city's Bridge Home projects. Next slide, please. So since 2019, we have almost doubled the number of people who have exited from interim housing into permanent housing on an annual basis. In fiscal year 2019, we saw that 2,400 folks approximately were placed directly into permanent housing from interim housing. And again, that is nearly double to over 4,000 in fiscal year 21-22. This is likely a result of introducing new interim housing options, such as non-congregate shelter that better serve the needs of our unhoused neighbors, but also, as I mentioned in the PRK discussion, it's impacted by the alignment of permanent housing resources like recovery housing and housing navigation services with participants in interim housing. Despite this progress, we can clearly do better as a system and need to do better. Next slide, please. So here we see the length of time that folks were served in interim housing. Interim housing is meant to be a short-term intervention while people either connect to permanent housing or another form of help like substance abuse treatment. This slide looks at those who enter interim housing and show what % of people are able to exit within 90 days. We see that as we have expanded interim housing, we are also seeing the length of stays increase. This is likely because we have not scaled permanent housing interventions at the same pace that we've scaled interim housing interventions. There may be other factors as well, and as I said, as I began this section, this is a high-level overview, and often what we will see in this data are questions that we need to dive further into to be able to appropriately diagnose exactly the cause of the trends that we're seeing in this data. Next slide, please. So as we look at the demographic breakdown of those served in interim housing, we see that we need to do a better job at reaching Latino people experiencing homelessness and ensuring that we can provide culturally and linguistically appropriate services needed to assist them into moving into permanent housing. So we see that they are underrepresented in both interim housing overall, as well as in the exits to permanent housing. But again, across the rest, we're seeing a fairly proportional distribution of success, but proportional is not equity. Councilmember Rodriguez?
Yeah, no, thank you, Nathaniel. I really wanted to underscore your use of the word underrepresented couldn't be more poignant. It's across a whole lot of areas, and it is people need to be more sensitive and acutely aware of the effect to the Latino community, to populations and housing them, the language barrier. When we had conversations, even on the outreach teams, of why it was so critical, how others were so ill-equipped to address the needs of, given the language barriers that are inherently very different for Latino populations than any other populations of unhoused communities. So I'm just trying to underscore that in particular, because sometimes I think there's a lot of, there's not often substantial recognition of that in my opinion. When it's been duly noted that among those that are going to be hardest impacted by even just some of the interim interventions that we had through COVID that are impending redactions, these are the populations that are going to be most acutely affected, is the Latino community. And in this moment of being the one remaining voice, I find it my obligation and responsibility to pound this message to each of my colleagues as loud and as amplified as possible, because they need to be acutely aware of the responsibility and additional obligations that we have, because disproportionately they are the largest growing population that is impacted. And so I just wanted to underscore that. And I think you chose the right word, which is the underrepresented in in these conversations far too often. So just wanted to underscore that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rodriguez. And yeah, I think particularly important to acknowledge that, especially given the growth in homelessness among Latino residents. It's really alarming and clearly indicates that we need to be focusing more resources and being really thoughtful about how we spend it. I want to just pause here for a moment. Nathaniel, I think this is the last slide before you move on to the next section, if I'm not mistaken. So why don't we pause this presentation here, if that's all right, and we can pick it up again next time during your slot for presentation. I want to encourage other committee members to take a look at the slide deck. It's in our council file. It's a really I think some of the stats are really eye-opening. I think particularly the slide before the one you had just shown, which had the amount of time in in-room housing increasing, even as we're increasing the number of in-room housing units. That's really important for us to take into account as we're considering how to spend the dollars that we have available ahead of us. And I want us to have the time to be able to sit with this data to really work, ask you a lot of questions. And so let's put some more time on the agenda for the next meeting to grapple with this. I don't want to give it short shrift, and we'll pick it up where you left off. And if that's all right with you, we can move on to item 8, which is the last item on the agenda. And thank you so much, Nathaniel, for that presentation, as well as you, Emily. I think these KPIs are so important. They will help us move towards that system of accountability that I think so many of us have been talking about and asking about and wanting to co-create with LAHSA. And we're looking forward to continuing to work with you on that.
Thank you. Glad to be able to come back and finish the presentation.
And yes, we're very much looking forward to it. All right, let's move on to item 8. Mr. Verano, can you read the item into the record?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Every time you come on, there's a kind of a chime from the heavens.
Oh, I must be my keyboard. Sorry about that, Madam Chair.
No, you're fine.
Item number 8 is a Chief Legislative Analyst report relative to preparing an ordinance to establish a commission on lived experience with homelessness under the Civil, Human Rights, and Equity Department, and identifying the budgeting and staffing resources necessary for the establishment of the commission and related matters.
Great. And we have from the CLA, Andy Gallen, who will be presenting this report to us. Andy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. Again, this is Andy Gallan from the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst. Before you is a report relative to a motion directing the Chief Legislative Analyst to make recommendations on the most effective method for establishing a commission with lived experience with homelessness, composed of individuals with current or past experience with homelessness to advise the City of Los Angeles. The CLA was also directed to consult with individuals with lived experience with homelessness who serve on lived experience advisory bodies in other jurisdictions as part of this effort. And so this report provides background on lived experience bodies in Los Angeles, as well as in general, and recommendations for the establishment of an advisory commission that is largely consistent with existing city advisory commissions and other lived experience commissions at large, and also includes preliminary budgetary estimates for the establishment of a commission. In preparing the recommendations to this report, several existing lived experience boards and service providers were consulted, and their input has been used as reference in the formation of our recommendations. These lived experience bodies include those from Austin, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Santa Clara. Discussions with these bodies included both support staff, the lived experience bodies as a whole, as well as additional conversations with individual members of the respective commissions. In Los Angeles, LAHSA staff, along with its two lived experience, two advisory boards on lived experience with homelessness, and local service providers were also consulted on the establishment of a lived experience commission. And consistent with the input received on the best practices, several of these best practices have been identified and included in the report to expand upon the advisory role of the proposed commission. These would be namely expansions to the responsibilities and compensation for the commission. The best practices relating to the roles and responsibilities of the commission are also listed separately as attachment 1 to the report. And in conclusion, just several aspects of the proposed commission, including any expanded role of the commission beyond the advisory role outlined in the report, as well as considerations for the administering department and appointing authority would require final determination by council. Thank you. I am available to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Gallen. We also at this time have, want to offer a moment to Sachin, the Housing and Homelessness Director from Councilmember Bonin's office, Sachin Madekar, an opportunity to speak. Their CD11 had asked to speak on this item and wanted to offer them a couple of moments.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Hello, council members. As Councilmember Rahman said, my name is Sachin, the Housing and Homelessness Director for Councilmember Mike Bonin, and I'm honored to speak here on this item for our office. First, I also want to thank Councilmember Rahman for moving this forward, the CLA and Andy Galan for their work on this, and all of those who called in to support. In many of our policy discussions on homelessness, the voice that is conspicuously absent is the voice of those with the lived experience of being unhoused, those who know firsthand the impact of our city's policies, what works and what doesn't. We have these types of commissions for other policy areas, and it's time we have one here. I want to share one note that is important to our office, which is that we want to make sure that in this commission, we especially uplift recent lived experience. As you all know, Councilmember Bonin has lived experience himself from the early 90s. And while this, of course, informs his work, he knows the situation on the streets has changed significantly since then and continues to change rapidly. And we must prioritize the voices of those who can speak to issues and needs on the streets and in our shelters today. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that comment, and thank you, Mr. Gallen, for your report and presentation. I want to open up the floor to my colleagues for questions on this item. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank and acknowledge, I know Mr. Bonin has been a huge advocate of ensuring that individuals experiencing homelessness that have the lived experience are part of the decision-making bodies as it relates to some of the work that we're doing on homelessness. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's why we created, I believe, the Committee on Lived Experience that coordinates with LASA, if I'm not mistaken, which helps to better inform that work. My question is, and because the proposal for the Civil and Human Rights and Equity Department, I'm just trying to reconcile that connection and whether or not they're poised, because I know that they're also not fully staffed, and I'm curious. Is someone available from Civil and Human Rights and Equity Department to speak on their capacity to even take this on?
I'm not sure, but Mr. Gallen, why don't you speak to why you had housed it there and whether you reached out to the office, to that department before you made the recommendation?
Of course. Unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to consult with the Civil, Human Rights and Equity Department prior to making the recommendation. However, I'm happy to explain some of the justifications that went into including that direction in our recommendations. So first and foremost, I would say that the proposed commission can be established as its own independent body. However, that would increase the staffing and budgetary resources needed to establish the commission. So the secondary option would be to put the proposed commission under an existing department and have that department administer the commission. And so out of the existing city departments that do work related to homelessness, including the housing department, the city administrative officer, There was really limited experience with administering commissions. During the last budget cycle, many of the housing department's commissions relating to equity were transferred over to the Civil and Human Rights and Equity Department. And so just with consideration of SHRED's experience administering commissions, as well as their focus on equity, which as directed by the motion was a big priority for this commission, the representation of both the ethnic makeup of the homeless population, as well as additional subpopulations that make up the homeless population.
But CHRED doesn't work on homelessness, right?
At the moment, not to my knowledge.
And, you know, and so, well, thank you for clarifying that and sharing that, because I think, you know, again, if the goal is to, you know, layering on another commission on this for an entity that is that does no work in this respective area, I think is number one a concern. Number two, because we don't want to appoint, first of all, place this responsibility on them when they don't even have the capacity and they haven't even been consulted, because it's not in their wheelhouse. But my other concern is that, again, the duplicative nature, given that we've done this with LASA, is there perhaps an inverted kind of consideration that we want to have? If you know, I see what the attempt is to do, but I'm just concerned is that, you know, again, what is the goal? I have to ask, what is the actual goal associated with this when we've already, and the potential for it being duplicative, given that we've already done this for LASA, which is essentially to inform all of this work with respect to, to these populations and being sensitive to how we drive some of the work and investments that we're doing explicitly with LASA. So I'm just concerned that this reinvents what we've already done. And I'm also concerned because we're talking about a substantial, we've got to talk about the budgetary impacts if we are going to include that for, placing it under the Civil Rights and Equity Department, because they don't have the current staffing and bandwidth to currently accommodate that. So that it also presents a number of economic implications as well that we need to consider, I think, through budget and finance. So I'd like to make a recommendation, given that they haven't been consulted. If we could amend the report to include an instruction to the CLA to report back on methods to create a meaningful feedback loop between the existing lived experience groups that have already been established and reside within LASA to other service provider groups in the city's program and policy development processes. So that I think, since we already have these appointed individuals with lived experience that is already being managed through LASA, that we basically derive that expertise from them and perhaps figure out a way to kind of draw that in rather than recreate another lived experience group that is housed within another department. And I'd like to move that perhaps we bifurcate the votes on the recommendations so that we can kind of consider each one individually.
Okay, I want to just thank you for those interventions. I think the call that CHRED needs to be consulted before another commission is added is a wise one. I think that they have a lot on their plate already, and sometimes it feels like they're just asked to take on what doesn't seem to fit anywhere else is being added to their plate, as opposed to it actually furthering their mission and the mission for which they were created for originally. And I don't want to do that. I believe in their work, and I believe in incorporating lived experience into decision making here at the city. I do want to push back slightly on the question around whether another lived experience body is duplicative, only because the city makes a significant amount of policy related to homelessness that is entirely separate from what LAHSA is doing. A lot of our laws related to, you know, even related to kind of how we share public spaces related to homelessness, you know, even our sanitation work related to homelessness, our care and care plus protocols, all of those are things that are a totally separate stream of work from what LAHSA is doing. And I think it is worthwhile to have a lived experience perspective to the policymaking that the city is taking on. And, you know, till a few weeks ago, we were having a very detailed conversation on whether we were, you know, going to be part of LAHSA at all. And I think that's also a conversation that is worth talking about in partnership with people who are experiencing homelessness and people who have experienced all of these agencies and policies directly. So I want to.
But I guess my point is that then we don't have to set up a separate commission. Why don't we have a representative on the commission for CHED then, rather than creating an entirely separate commission? That's also an option. Is that you have some for civil human rights and equity. If that's what you're, rather than setting up an entirely, if you want to assure representation in these conversations, because when you talk about sanitation, for example, I could see that being an opportunity for us to engage the LAHSA related lived experience group. But rather than talking about an entirely independent, a separate effort that is housed within a department that doesn't, you know, if you're, to your point, Ms. Rahman, if you're saying that they need to be consulted in all these other facets, then you would appoint an individual with that lived experience on the commissions that you're looking to derive that information from, rather than creating an entirely independent commission on that. So that's, I'm saying that then I think it would be it would facilitate and be more inclusive to ensure that, for example, on the Commission for Civil Human Rights and Equity, that you have someone appointed that has had lived experience.
Right. I think it's certainly a question worth considering. Councilmember Blumenfield, did you have any inputs into this? I know we're facing a little bit of a time crunch here, so I want to.
No, we are, and I'm trying to balance three different things that I'm supposed to go speak in 10 minutes ago.
Okay.
So I do agree that, I mean, putting this on tread right off without them engaging in it doesn't make sense. They need to be part of this process, and it needs to be clear what are we asking them to do. It's not really, of course we want input from people with lived experience. I think we all agree on that. You know, I go out of my way to get that just personally by meeting with folks with lived experience on a regular basis and talking about their experiences in the interim sites and in general. But and so, you know, the concept here is a good one. I'm not sure this is focused enough on, I don't know exactly what they're going to be doing. It's one thing if they're going to be like going to the different sites, like the LAHSA sites, and evaluating them from the perspective of somebody who has lived experience. But just setting them up generically as a policy advisor to the council is a little odd. We don't do that we generally don't do that for policy decisions. We don't have a thousand different perspectives, each having a commission to weigh in. In fact, most of these commissions that we have, we tell them not to focus on the policy. We give them a task, you know, like and in fact, some of them have gotten into trouble, like the parking commission. They should focus on parking, but the other, you know, I had to jump in because they were starting to try to prevent us from creating a safe parking lot because that had to do with homelessness, and they were moving into that zone. So I like the concept. I'm not sure I know I'm being called away right now, so we're way over my time.
Okay. So I think the report did have clarity on what the commission was supposed to do. But in the interests of time, and because I think there is more discussion to be had on this, maybe what we can do at this moment is to approve CLA's recommendation 2, which is just getting the budgetary analysis on this. And I'm trying to look at where the sorry.
And it would be a budget for what, though?
Sorry, one second.
I was expecting that. What? Yeah.
Hold on one second. I'm so sorry.
And then I've got people.
He's got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
can
we move item 2 forward, which is just instructing the CAO to report with just budgetary and staffing resources for the establishment of a commission on lived experiences with the scope of work proposed here, and to identify a source of that funding forward, just so we can have this discussion with the exact budgetary numbers in front of us. I think that will be useful as well. And also include a recommendation that we speak to CHRED about their capacity to support and take on this kind of work, and or if not, identify other alternatives. And 3, to see whether there are ways of incorporating existing to incorporate the voices of people with lived experience either on existing commissions or to work with LASA's existing commission and serve some of the original goals identified in this motion. So if we could come back to so this would be, we're going to ask the CLA to report back on these 3 things.
Or the CAO?
CAO on the first, and then the CLA on the second 2. And to come back to this committee and to have a fuller discussion with that information in front of us, because I think that will flesh out some of the questions that have been brought up already. Are you guys comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Yes, great. Mr. Verano, can you please call the roll?
And to confirm, Councilmember Rahman, this includes Councilmember Rodriguez's amendment, correct?
Well, it's a slight change on that amendment, just to say it would be, can we look at whether the voices of people with lived experience can be incorporated to existing commissions in the city, or whether LASA's commission on lived experience can serve the purposes outlined in this motion for the city.
Great, thank you for the clarification, Councilmember.
Yes, thank you.
Councilmember Rahman.
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino. Councilmember Buscaino is absent. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Aye.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Aye.
3 ayes, and this item is approved as amended.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for your patience. And really, I thought this was a great discussion today, and I appreciate you all for engaging in it so deeply and so thoughtfully. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.